Hello friends, and here is the karma reading. I'm still testing. I still don't know if I'm going to keep this reading, so if you like it you have to say something, or I will save myself about 30 hours of work and kind of like just continue with my other monthlies. I really think like we are getting through quite a bit. I have modified the spread a little bit this time in order to be a little bit more efficient. So let's start with just like telling you that there are still some specials going on. If you guys want your reading, like you're going to get it sort of like one level up. So instead of like regular 2 to 3 weeks wait, I am kind of like dishing it out in a week, and if for some reason I'm a little bit late, you get a little bit more time added to it. And if you really want a rush, which before it was 7 days, now you get it in 3 days, and urgent was 3 days before, now pretty much you're getting within 24 hours. Then if you're in North America, you're getting, if it's done between 2 p.m. then you're getting it the same day. Also guys, the X spread is on kind of like looks like permanent special, and one special that many of you already asked me about is really coming up, and is going to be 2019 annual scope. And for those of you who enjoy 2018 scope, please come on my website cattarot.ca and put yourself on a mailing list, because I'm going to be letting you know this pre-order price of $19.99 per sign or $39.99 for all signs is basically going to last only maybe 3 weeks, and is going to probably be enclosed in the monthly reading, which is kind of like coming in about a few days. And take advantage of it, because otherwise it's kind of like jumping up to $29.99 and $59.99. Okay, so let's go to where we have to be. You see, I was not that long. I'm reading this with Kipper, and I'm reading this with Cosmic Tarot. This is kind of like giving me a good combination. And I actually told you that I have sort of like simplified this, because I find this, I mean, you knew that the spread was like just like I'm in work in progress. So now I want to see what is dark, what is light in the situation. These are significators. They are the same in every reading, and they are simply just like sort of like the areas that I really want to explore. The reasons behind the situation, the guidance, and what are the karmic basically lessons that we actually need to learn in all of that. So let's start, guys. Hello my dear Taurus, and welcome to your Twin Flames October. And just like I'm saying to everybody else, make sure you're checking your ascendant and you are checking your moon sign at the very least. And if you really want to get more details, check your Venus sign. And if you're cross-watching a video for some other sign, then check their Mars sign as well. So let's first see what is kind of like brewing behind. Oh la la, you're getting Judgment, and I think I broke my nail. It's just like kind of irritating me. And with my OCD, I have to remedy this before I'm moving on. Judgment card. This is definitely telling me, guys, you're dealing with someone with whom you had past lives. It's probably a connection that is like extremely strong. Well, past lives. Twin flames generally are past life kind of like creature, right? When you kind of like chase each other through like centuries, and one life like you're a baby and they are like old person. It's kind of like the time on the other side doesn't have such a big kind of like value as we have it here, because here not only has to happen as being contemporary, but also it has to happen that we are sort of like within the age limit, and not to mention in the same spot in the world, or somehow kind of like cross it, right? So this is kind of like really interesting, because we see here these 3 trumpets, kind of like they reach basically from the cosmos to wake the dead. And so like two, basically, I don't know if this is a woman or one woman and 2 men, I guess, kind of like spring from the basically soil. And it's kind of like also that we are seeing this kind of like spectrum of light over here, right? This is kind of like definitely talking about the end of the cosmic cycle. In your case, it kind of like came reversed. So something is obviously not ending yet, right? This is like talking about kind of like that resurrection. And of course, in Christianity, people are kind of like raising from tombs and graves. It's kind of like really, really familiar to many of us who kind of like either are cultural Christians or Christians, right? So this is like really talking about this kind of like jumping from one body to another body. This also what most people forget. This is not only that we have to now wait for a next lifetime for this to happen. Sometimes that soul jumps into another person, and that's why we sometimes meet the same person in a different body. And right, and sometimes we kind of like repeat this like pattern over here. So that's kind of like that recreation and karma, and it's like something that is kind of like really putting an imprint on our basically consciousness, right? So karma and judgment is kind of like almost like the same meaning, and it's like I'm talking about something, whether good or bad, it somehow has to be resolved, right? And this is kind of like forcing us to confront the consequences of basically our actions, both physical and mental, and having a great fortune. So like I think here in your case, Taurus, it's kind of like something brewing behind, something needs to be cleared, and problems need to be kind of like solved. Maybe there is like a sense of suffocating that you're experiencing that maybe kind of like needs to give way to fresh air and kind of like finally feeling that the problems are solved, right? So if you need to forgive someone, or if you need to repent, this is the time to do it, because you will be cleaning the slate. This is like so strongly communicating over here. And come on, please, clear my camera. Is it going to kind of like rework itself? No? Okay, let me help you kind of like come to your senses. There you go. So nope, it's just like playing with me. So I'm going to do it without autofocus. Sorry guys about that. Now this also can talk about transformation. So there's like something that is happening that kind of like is really kind of like maybe kind of like tagging you. Maybe you're getting that in your dreams. This is kind of like this combination of the cards is like extremely significant. And your earth sign, like generally earth signs, especially Taurus, because it's so big and so strong, it's kind of like really moving slow, but it's kind of getting somewhere, where most of us air signs, we just like fly. I'm so tired, right? Now for things that will come in the open, like you have Five of Swords, right? And it's kind of like reversed. And also you have distant horizons, which kind of like we have this anchor over here, and here also, I don't know if you can see it, we do have the water in the background, and we do have this like Leonardo's pentacle over here. If you actually notice here, everything is kind of like bare, nothing is growing, yet we have 5 roses, and every single one has been kind of like pierced with a sword. So now that's kind of like really interesting. What is really going on here? There's like somebody who is basically obviously reaching out for basically their entire potential, right? Because that's kind of like the pentacle of man over here. And this kind of like waistline here is like saying this is not going to stay this way, because ocean is nearby, right? So these 5 basically points here definitely suggest 5 senses, right? And the kind of like swords, which kind of like talk about mental processes, like in piercing, these roses are talking that, you know, maybe like some kind of like words or actions, or more or less words, like, because like the swords are always about points, and words have been used to kind of like almost like enslave the passions and spirit. The energy is like sort of like sapped in this situation, and it's kind of like somebody who is like really being passive under this kind of like influence. Because here's like talking about repentance, and here this card is really talking about blame and like getting an insight when it's like too late, right? and also accepting unavoidable. But it's also talking about clearing perspective and new knowledge and kind of like seeing things from kind of like a different way. Because like when I see it here, we see basically almost like a boat, but the boat that is almost like spaceship, kind of like it's floating obviously above this, and the anchor is floating around, so there is like a time to uplift. So we are almost like going to these two extremes, like somebody feeling kind of like pinned down to reaching all the way up. So there is like a need for some kind of like a freedom. There is like a need of, I don't know, like maybe you really, really want to be with this person, because this is really saying you might win, but beware of what you kind of like wish for, kind of a thing, right? It could also just mean that you have maybe moved away, or there's like somebody who kind of like feels distant, right? Like with this kind of like card, distant horizon, because when we have an anchor, we always are talking about, okay, do we want to, and when do we want to put it down, right? Anchor generally signifies kind of like stabilization, but I think what is like really more dominant is like this basically ship that is like kind of like floating around. So this is really telling me that there is a need for releasing certain things, guys. In your case, you might not be even aware that this is like something that has been kind of like lasting, not only in the last few months that you're with this person, not only in the last few years, maybe in who knows in how many centuries, right? So this card actually talks about yearnings and dreams and hopes and wishes, right? So sailing to a new shore if you really wish, right? So I don't know, like maybe you're dating a foreigner, or you want somebody else who is like elsewhere, kind of a thing. That also can mean faraway places, right? And kind of like, since means foreigners also means keeping an open mind and developing new views. This is definitely, guys, developing like spirituality. You guys are lifting yourself up and becoming like more spiritual and philosophical, right? So it's kind of like really, really interesting, because it's also right next to a really, really positive card, which this card would become even more positive. But this card here is like talking about some kind of like feeling of not being able to kind of like break through over here. So guys, what's going to be happening here, that you'll be able to open up and feel again ability to dream and fantasize, right? And you know, certainly it's going to kind of like indicate also silver lining on the horizon, right? So I don't know, maybe are you traveling somewhere in a foreign country, or traveling somewhere where there's like water, or you're living somewhere where there's water, or you really want somebody to kind of like pin somebody down? It's kind of like interesting. We'll see. Then we have reason. What are some kind of like reasons for this current emotions? And then you're having strength and official person, and there is like a master number 22. The strength card is like, it's kind of like really, really interesting, because in this deck, voila, she's naked. She's like just holding something to basically, you know, for us not to see. She also has the snake over here on the top. Snakes have multitude of meanings, and most of the meaning in this deck, especially when it's like over here on top of it, is like talking about Kundalini rising. And Kundalini is like that spiritual thing. Maybe you're dealing with somebody who is like very rigid, who kind of like has their own rules, because both of these cards, and I don't know if you're going to noticing, strength is usually 8 in this deck, is 11, just like in the old kind of like tarot style. And 11 is, again, looks like this master number. Check it on my website, cattarot.ca, a little bit more about master numbers. So now you're having 22 and 11 together, making 33. So like you have 3 master number, one hidden and 2 kind of like in the open. So this is again about spirituality, and it is like about somebody who maybe did not want to settle down, like, and there is like inability to commit. And this is like really telling me about somebody who is humorless, somebody who is like really rigid, or you just simply might be going through some kind of like, especially if you're, let's say, immigrant, running into issues with you know, papyrology, like paperwork and stuff. It's just like not not kind of, it has to be done by the book. The Strength card, I'm not really not enthused when I see it reversed, because the Strength talks about beating our own selves, right? Talking about kind of like lower urges, etc. So when the card reverses, it's kind of like really telling me about smoldering energy. Somebody's like being too much over here, another person is like maybe kind of like putting the barrier to it, right? It could be kind of like weakness and lack of faith and lack of confidence, right? And definitely a vice. Maybe you're dealing with somebody who's like just not even willing to understand that they have their own issues. And then you have Prince of Swords. So we have here air. So Prince in this particular deck, and look at this like pretty hawk. It is kind of like really interesting because swords and court cards are really talking about development of a personality. In this particular deck, it's represented with Aquarians, and in the other decks is Gemini. So this is like really talking about, as you can see, he is not ill-meaning, but this kind of card can really come across to the other people as really harsh, because there is like somebody who kind of like really wants to get solutions and resolutions to kind of like some issues. Swords, as you had it here, like maybe there was a situation where you kind of like couldn't find words, you didn't know like, I mean, how to move from that position. But like when you're like in this particular basically card, in this kind of things, you know, he could be a philosopher, because the sword is definitely prominent and swords connect with words, right? And also spirituality. He also has a really thick book, because this is always about kind of like learning. Just like somebody who likes theater, who is kind of like eccentric, and who might have very unusual circle of friends. So this could be this person that you're addressing, because this is guidance. It could be some kind of like message that is kind of like received. You know, we have Prince of Cups, which is like Scorpio in this deck, but here, you know, this is also the person, just like Prince of Cups, who loves the world, right? Rather than focusing on individuals. So hence that kind of like Aquarian energy. And this is also telling about somebody who is kind of like suffocated with sort of like monogamous relationship. This is like somebody who is very stimulating, who kind of like has his way with words, right? And it's like somebody who is like really not going to understand you when you tell them, look, I just like want to be mano a mano, kind of like one-on-one relationship, right? He's going to say, what the heck, you know, like, I mean, it's one life, we need to kind of like be free. Somebody who is not going to see anything wrong with this. So you might be dealing also with somebody who's like really new age, or somebody who is like really, hello Matrix, hello, and are you my Prince of Swords? I still cannot figure out who he is. I think he is Taurus, and I thought he was a Scorpio, and we celebrate on the 28th this month his birthday, even because I kind of like rescue him on that day. But we still don't know who you are. Are you Aquarian? No, he's like too loyal, and he's like, I really think he's Taurus. So did you show up for your reading? He doesn't talk like Safi. Safi just wants to be engaged. So guys, you might be dealing with somebody here who is not committing. This is overall telling me, this is the message that I'm getting. You do have a karma card. So there is like something really karmic in this situation. Maybe you know this person very well or not well at all, and yet you're feeling connectivity that is like really deep and strong. And it is a spiritual basically underlying lesson in that. Like look, you have like these three major arcanas numbers, and it's kind of like really interesting to understand that this is like kind of like a karmic engagement in this like entire situation. So what is really karma talking about? And here is this Four of Pentacles and poverty. Yes, Matrix, I love you. Now this is kind of like really interesting. We see a guy who is possibly getting a manicure over here. Very unusual card for Four of Pentacles, which generally talks about somebody who is not willing to share, like feeling a little bit closed. Poverty is not necessarily kind of like issues with money, but poverty can talk about, yes, Matrix. Oh my gosh, he's all over me. This poverty can really talk about somebody not being able to expand, right? Come on, sweetie, lay down somewhere. This kind of like two cards are telling me that there is like sort of like situation of waiting. It's almost like that you are like placed in some kind of like spiritual box where you're kind of like being protected, and while you're there you're actually enjoying all these kind of like earthy things. And also, I don't know if you're noticing, here we have the books, we have a vase which seems to have some kind of like oriental pattern on it. Not sure, you guys might tell me better. But like what I see here is the phone. You know, I'm just like wondering if you're feeling kind of like let down by someone, or is there an issue with some kind of like communication here? Because Four of Pentacles basically is really guarded energy. If this is you, be very careful not to push too forward someone and too much someone. You know, like sometimes people feel pushed and then, you know, like they say, oh, you're just too much, and they kind of like run away from it, right? It's kind of like really interesting over here, because the man here kind of like looks somber, but he's kind of like really relishing in his basically prosperity, right? And even though like I see the couple here, and you know, I see somebody who is kind of like seeing himself higher, and he does have this like sun sign here over here on his upper lip, and it's kind of like showing Capricorn over here. So I don't know if there is like a connection anywhere. It's kind of like a little bit patronizing attitude toward this woman, sort of like somebody who is maybe willing to kind of like be a benefactor, or there is this connection. Maybe you're involved with somebody who kind of like has an upper hand over you over here, and like I mean, the knowledge is in his hands, the gifts are in his hands, and when he calls, they're also in his hands. There's like somebody who's like definitely preoccupied over here, and he always like kind of has some kind of like important business to do. So this actually can talk about scholarships as well, and foundations, usually philanthropist. I'm becoming like Donald Trump, cannot pronounce words. So it makes sense to me. I have to learn all these words. So, but it's also can talking about somebody who is have inability to share, and somebody who is kind of like either cheap or unwilling to kind of like share. I'm not talking just about sharing money, sharing good times, sharing kind of like oh my honey, this kind of happened to me. So overall, Taurus, what I'm seeing over here is that you might be waiting for somebody to call, and you're actually dealing with someone who actually doesn't even want to commit. This is kind of like the last thing on their mind, and you're like really obsessing about that. So it's going to be a period where you're going to get a call, and you might actually really ask the true questions. You might ask questions that you need to know, and because you know, if somebody doesn't really mean something serious with you, they need to let you go. They need to kind of like set you free, or you need to do that if this is kind of like you in this kind of like circumstance. So it would be interesting to hear it from you guys, and please check your ascendant, check your moon sign, and just like see where this goes. Okay, and thank you guys, Taurus, for being here with me. If you haven't subscribed, please do. And until the next time, you know that I love you, and you can get the reading through my website, cattarot.ca. Love you, and Matrix loves you too. Bye bye.